This is an active mining operation in the Canadian oil sands. It's not a very pretty sight when you open up the earth in order to extract the oil, but after this operation is finished, it will be reclaimed. All this land around us has been mined. Look at it now. You have this beauty returning to the landscape. Here I've got alder, spruce, aspen. Where there was once an oil sands mining operation, you now have a beautiful biodiverse landscape again, where you'd never know there'd been a mine there in the first place.
What's Patrick Moore, a founder of Greenpeace, doing in an oil sands ad? You'll no doubt find a lot of answers in his book, Confessions of a Greenpeace Dropout. But for a little instant gratification, we've roped the man in himself, Patrick Moore, joining us from Vancouver. Hi, Patrick.
Hello, Charles. Nice to be with you.
All right, so those of us who've, say, lived about half a century on this blue dot called planet Earth, we grew up thinking of you as a radical guy. Well, clearly there's been a bit of a transition, a bit of a maturation process. People grow up, and Patrick has grown up, and I want you to take some time to give me a little biography, how you've gone from radical to realist.
Well, Charles, I grew up in the wilderness of northern Vancouver Island on the west coast, and developed a love of nature from the beginning of my life, and that steered me into the life sciences when I ended up at the University of British Columbia. And then in the mid-60s, before the word was known to the general public in the press, I discovered the science of ecology, the science of how all living things are interrelated and how we are related to them and are all part of this Earth's ecology. And so I knew I'd found my calling for life, and I've spent over 40 years now squarely focused on the environment and sustainability. It was the height of the Cold War and the height of the Vietnam War and the threat of all-out nuclear holocaust. I didn't actually think it was all that radical to be against everybody being fried in a nuclear war, but we were called radicals and we were hippies, and we took up the cause, and I joined this little group in a church basement, and we became Greenpeace. And then I spent the next 15 years, by far longer than anyone else who was in that first voyage, in the leadership of Greenpeace around the world. French nuclear testing, save the whales, the Japanese and Russian slaughter of whales on the high seas, that made us famous around the world. The baby seal campaign, which was looked a bit askance here at home by many people, but again made us famous around the world. And then the whole issue of toxic wastes, and by the mid-80s we'd grown into a group with $100 million a year coming in, and I had been one of 6 international directors for the past 6 years. And my fellow directors, just by coincidence, none of them had any science education. And they were beginning to adopt policies that I could not accept. I'd finished my PhD in ecology at the University of BC, and science has always been front and center for me. And so I saw Greenpeace drifting into sensationalism, misinformation, and fear campaigns, and it was not for me. So we parted ways amicably at the time. But since then, I have watched them and their allies in the movement adopt position after position, which I do not believe properly balances the needs of our civilization with the need to protect the environment. And sustainability is very much about balance.
Patrick, it's not that I'm trying to be cynical. It's just that in most stories, if you follow the money, you can try to figure out what the plot is really about. So let me just ask you this. Whether we're talking about governments, whether we're talking about corporations, individuals, not-for-profits and for-profits, often when they find a source for money, they do whatever it takes to get more of it. Is it possible that a lot of the sensationalism that you talk about with respect to Greenpeace was all about stimulating the sources for money and getting as much out of them as possible?
Well, organizations do have to be maintained, and the people on both sides accuse the people on the other side of being motivated by money. We're all motivated by the survival of ourselves and our families. So I actually don't impugn other people's motives. I don't know what's going on inside their heads, and I'd rather discuss the issues squarely on, as whether it's the oil sands or climate change or forestry or mining. I'd rather discuss the actual issues on a scientific and logical basis rather than getting into innuendo and sensationalism, which is too often the case.
So from your perspective, Patrick Moore didn't really change. You've got the same principles, the same interests, the same values that you had when we first got to know you, many of us more than 30 years ago. You're saying it's Greenpeace that changed.
Well, no, I changed too. When I was with Greenpeace, we were just focused on the environment. Although we were also focused on the survival of human civilization, because the whole nuclear weapons issue was very much around that. But it was when I discovered the concept of sustainable development, or sustainability as it's known now, in the early 80s, and that's when I began to drift away from Greenpeace, and they were drifting away from my way of thinking. So I think it was a divergence rather than anyone going over to the other side, as is often claimed. I still support every single thing we did in the early years I was with Greenpeace for 15 years. Save the whales, stop the bomb, toxic waste reduction, and all of that, with one exception, and that's nuclear energy, because I think we made a mistake. If we'd recognized the environmental benefits of nuclear energy in those days, there'd be a lot less coal plants in the world today. So that was an unintended outcome of a very serious error in thinking, sort of lumping nuclear energy in with nuclear weapons as if everything nuclear was evil, when in fact, like, nuclear medicine is a very important part of our medicine, and nuclear energy is and will be even more important in the future.
Well, some of those environmental solutions that you're talking about for sustainability, that's what we want to talk about with you in just a few moments. Patrick Moore, thank you very much for this portion of the conversation. We'll be back with much more of you and your sustainable solutions in just a few moments. We want to hear from you folks on this or any other topic. Be a citizen of Adler Nation. Send us email, charlesadler@sunmedia.ca. We read them all. Your opinions matter to us a great deal. We're back with the sensible environmentalist, Patrick Moore, founder of Greenpeace and author of Confessions of a Greenpeace Dropout. Patrick, we want to talk about some of your sustainable solutions, but your participation in the ad for the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, did you sort of pace the room for quite a bit before doing that ad, or are you doing it loudly and proudly?
I did actually pace the room a bit, Charles. I've never really done a lot of work around the fossil fuel sector. They've got plenty of help as it is. And yet at the same time, I became incensed at the way Canada was being portrayed in our friends' countries, in the United States and in Europe, as some kind of evil monster destroying the planet, destroying the boreal forest is always used. And I wanted to see it for myself. So I went up there and toured the oil sands on 2 occasions with full tours of not just the mining, but also the processing side, and lots of in-depth briefings on what's going on there. And I've studied it well. And I know that it's the law that every single square inch of that place that's disturbed by oil sands operations must be returned to a native boreal forest ecosystem. And I saw that they are doing that. And it's in the ad. You can see it. And really, the land is only opened up for a blink in nature's eye, if you think in geological terms, besides which they're cleaning the sand. They're taking the oil off the sand in an area the size of Florida, and that sand is covered in what they all call toxic oil. Well, what's wrong with taking the toxic oil off the dirt and returning it back cleaner to the environment and then replanting it with all of the native shrubs and trees? So that's why I did it, because I really thought we were being misrepresented, and I agree with Ezra Levant's book, Ethical Oil, because there is no other country that exports a lot of oil that has as good an environmental and labor and human rights record as we do. And the United Nations and all of the NGOs that monitor human rights and labor laws and environmental regulations, they all say Canada is one of the best in the world.
All right, let's do some tree hugging here, Patrick. And I don't say that in any kind of pejorative sense. I know that one of your sustainable futures, one of your issues of environmental realism is tree planting. Who is getting in the way of anybody wanting to plant more trees? Help us with that.
Well, nobody's against planting more trees, but they're against then cutting them and using the wood that you obtain. And so, you know, one of the greatest ironies of the environmental movement is they're basically opposed to using the most important renewable energy and material resource in the world, which is wood. And it's pretty hard to get wood unless you cut a tree. So my philosophy is grow more trees and use more wood. I'm all in favor of a full parks and wilderness system. I helped create it here in British Columbia during the 90s, working with the forest industry to negotiate the doubling of parks and wilderness in this province, and I was squarely in favor of it all the way through. But I also think that we should be growing more trees and using more wood, because every time you don't use wood where you could use it, you end up using steel, concrete, or plastic instead, all of which are perfectly good things. But they use a lot more energy and more fossil fuels in their creation, where wood is produced by solar energy. And so for the environmental movement to say they're in favor of renewables and then they're against wood, which is 70% of all the renewable energy in the world and about 95% of all the renewable materials that we use in the world. So how can you say you're for renewables and then be against the most important one?
I gather you're also in favor of growing more genetically modified foods in the interests of environmental realism.
Well, it's not just that. I mean, yes, I am in favor of using our genetic science to improve the nutrition and productivity of our foods. This Frankenfood anti-GMO movement is based on complete fantasy. There is no evidence of any harm to environment or health, and every Academy of Science in the world, including the International Academy of Science, supports the use of GMOs. So that the opposition to it is wrong-headed. But I also support the use of technology in general in agriculture. The mechanization of agriculture will bring women out of poverty and out of having no education, living in subsistence agriculture, having huge families, and it also addresses the population issue as well as the education and wealth issue. Just look at the countries in this world where agriculture is mechanized versus those that are still in subsistence agriculture, and you will see what I mean. It's crazy to have this idea of going back to organic or basically primitive agriculture when in fact we have learned how to grow a lot more food on a lot less area with modern agriculture, and that means less nature has to be destroyed in order to grow our food. There's all kinds of good reasons for supporting intensive agricultural production with the use of our technology, chemistry, and genetics.
Now, you also talk about the reduction on our dependence on fossil fuels. That's something that's going to be absolutely vital going forward.
Well, the fact, I mean, you may know I'm not a climate catastrophist. I do not believe in that line of thinking. It is possible that we're having some impact on climate, but this whole extreme weather thing is just a lot of sensationalism. And even the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says there is no evidence of any footprint of human or natural caused climate change on extreme weather events. They published that in March this year, but it just gets ignored. The fact is, we are too reliant on fossil fuels in this world. 86% of all energy for our civilization is from fossil fuels, and in particular coal. We should be building more nuclear plants and more hydroelectric dams and less coal plants, because one day we're going to want that coal to convert it into liquid fuel for transportation when the oil and gas get scarce, because they are less abundant than coal. And no doubt we will run out of, well, not totally, because there'll always be a little bit to scratch out, I suppose, but it'll be expensive then. We will have scarcer fossil fuels in the future. And then we'll really be happy we've got nuclear energy, because I don't know what else we would turn to when we do run out. So conserving
Patrick,
fossil fuels...
I've got to put a pause on there because I got a hard out here, as they say in TV land. But please don't make yourself scarce. You're always welcome on our porch. Thank you so much, Patrick.
Thanks a lot, Charles.
Patrick Moore, ladies and gentlemen.